introduce myself briefly. Some of you I know from many years, but I just want to say that it's been a real pleasure for me. And I was first contacted when Ogi came to visit. And Ogi originally, I think, had contact with Gen because Gen is my research manager in the sense that he grows most of the rice, and he had the green thumb and the knowledge coming into this project 22 or 23 years ago when he first showed up at my door at Cornell, and I was trying to get my rice program launched. And nobody at Cornell was very good at growing rice. So I just want to say that you are an audience, if you will, or a community of people that, like me, have had to bootstrap yourselves. So whatever I can share with you, it's in an academic setting. I'm not trying to do this commercially, but some of the things that we've learned and then some of the resources that we can share, I hope, will be useful to you, or you can also provide us with feedback. Let us know what it is that would be most useful to you. I feel like as an academic person with some access to funding, it doesn't come easily, we compete for every penny we get, but if we can create an environment in which the resources that we develop are used to drive livelihoods and productivity among a grower community that is, in this case, kind of an innovative and really experimental growing community, that we are linking science with agriculture in the way that it should be done. In other words, we're trying to respond to interest on the part of people who are innovators themselves. And what we do is collect information, gather it, and bring people and resources together. That's our main role as educators. I don't think we are trying to show you how to grow rice. No, of course not. Although some of the members of our community, Gen, for instance, was a rice grower in Japan for many years before he came. Through my good fortunes and through a fortuitous marriage to an American who brought him back to this country. I mean, it's just these things happen in life. So what I thought I'd do today is talk to you a little bit about information resources. Now, some of you are off the grid. I know that internet isn't everybody's source of information, but nonetheless, I thought I would tell you about information resources that are available mostly on the internet and as downloadable information. All of the resources I'm going to talk to you about are publicly available, and what I've done is go through and select things that I thought might have information that at least getting started or as consultation might be useful. And one of the good things about these resources is that there are, of course, people behind them, and should you have questions, specific questions, you can often direct them into the sites that I'll point you to, because these are people whose job it is to try to provide information that you need, gather it, or link you with other people. All right, so I have to start out with our own website because we are, in fact, funded by the National Science Foundation to do a lot of science. We're doing a lot on rice diversity, looking at it in the genetic and in the phenotypic sense and trying to identify how to make breeding more efficient for the future. But our website looks like this in its homepage, and it's a very simple URL, just www.ricediversity.org. And if you go into that site, these have pull-down menus. So you can find information about the germplasm that we've purified and that we're using on the project, and that is the foundation for what the NSF has funded us to do. Data sets which include, in some cases, phenotypic data, especially for things that are grown in this country, but we haven't got any phenotypic data on this site yet from the Northeast. It's all from the southern US. So we don't yet have anything from you on this website. We're trying to organize that. Most of the information that might be relevant to this conference can be found by pushing on the Education and Outreach button, and you get a drop-down menu that takes you into this site, which is the Ecological Rice Farming in the Northeastern US. This is your site, in a sense. So when we first got off the ground, we started with the conference, and I think the conference proceedings are available from 2009, 2011, 12, 13, 14. So there was nothing in 2010. We just didn't have a conference. It's not that we failed to provide the proceedings. Here you'll have this year's, and it will be a downloadable as a video because it's streaming right now. All of the presentations are taped. You can go through them again. You can use them as educational tools should you want to extract that for discussions elsewhere. maybe the most important thing that we're doing right now that would be, I think, of help for everybody is we're trying to map the regions where people are growing rice, those of you who come or with whom we maintain some kind of contact, and the growing degree day predictions for your farms, which can tell you which varieties are likely to prosper and flower in your environments. And it's not all predictable by latitude. So ecology and altitude and other things, of course, play into it. So if you can help us by providing information about your growing degree days, you'll appear as a dot on our map. And I think, Mia, you'll be talking more about that, so I won't pause here to explain it, but Mia will be going into that. This is going to be maybe the best place where information can both come and go. So our attempt would be to maintain this site. We are out of funding as of the end of July, so a few days ago. The project has ended. NSF we are under consideration for a renewal, but it has not happened yet. So we are looking for sources of funding. We've prepared proposals, and we, like any one of you, are looking for sources of funding to keep our people employed and to keep the website open. At the moment, we can only say that we will endeavor to do that for the next year as we try to transition to another source of funding. But at the moment, I just want you to know how tenuous it is. Universities are also not funded to do anything. We have to bring in our own funds. So we're just small businesses, much like you. Only our university takes more than half of the money we bring in as overhead to the university. So, and the SARE grant that originally funded the Akaogis, we've been actually very grateful for the SARE support, and we are advocating that people in this group attend the SARE conferences. There's one at UMass, and you saw all the propaganda, if you will, for that coming up in a few weeks, next week. Next week. And then there'll be a NOFA conference in New York in midwinter. And we are going to be having a presence at the NOFA conference in New York. Our little group will be having a presence there because we want to try to let the USDA and our funding agencies see us. So we will encourage anybody who would like to attend that conference to come and continue to have this kind of forum. So if you go on this site and you want to see the proceedings from this year or any other year, they're both live, and you can download the proceedings as a written format. And then just so you see what the actual thing looks like, this was 2013, last year's conference, and you can click on any of the presenters, and I think that you'll get their full story. You'll get the full presentation. So that's what that looks like. Now I'm going to switch over to talk about information resources. And the thing that I thought I would do is highlight the kind of information that I, sitting out in the middle of Cornell University, imagine that you, in the middle of your fields, right, want to know. So correct me anywhere you want or help us get more realistic in terms of information. But so what kind of information is interesting to you and where can you find it? This is my best attempt to address that, right? Forgive me if I've completely missed the boat. So I figure a lot of people ask us, they send us email, what kind of varieties can grow well in my area? Where can I get seed from those varieties? That's a big issue right now, and we don't yet have a reliable seed source. Everybody is doing this a little bit bootstrapping. And then what additional information is known about those varieties? Like, what are the grain quality characteristics? What kinds of diseases and pests might I run into? What nutritional and water requirements do I need to grow the plants? How can I manage the post-harvest processing? How should I dry my rice? How should I dehull it? What kind of machinery is available for me to help? So these are the kinds of things that we get at least queries from you. And I just thought I would just say that when we talk about this group, most of you are growing organic, or you at least qualify as small-scale producers. And therefore, the information resources that you need are very different than the vast majority of information that's available on rice in the United States. So I think GRIN is still, from the US perspective, that's the Germplasm Resource Information Network, that's still the source of seed for many of you where the most variation can be found, and it's already in the US, you don't need a permit. If you request it from GRIN, you can put it in the ground tomorrow. You will only get a small handful of seed. You have to be prepared to amplify that seed yourself or in collaboration with somebody who already knows how to grow it in order to blow it up. In other words, to amplify that seed. Yes, we use our... Erie is a very good source of information, both because they have the knowledge bank, and I'll talk quite a bit about that. They have lots of information on step-by-step production, agronomy guides, decision tools, and training opportunities, and they are entirely devoted to the small grower. The vast majority of rice is, of course, produced in Asia, and probably 95% of the rice on the planet is produced in Asia. And the average farm size in Asia is less than a half hectare. So people grow almost all the rice we eat on very small parcels of land, and most of it's manual labor. The trend is away from that, but that's still the reality. The Rice Diversity Project, which is our little project, and our colleagues in the SRI website at Cornell, and Lucy Fisher's here in the room, she's done a tremendous amount of work to just gather information, and there's a lot on that resource. And I think that between those two, Cornell actually features, when the USDA shows where rice is grown, Cornell University comes up as a major point where rice is grown, because we grow a lot of diverse things under glass. So after the USDA, we're the US largest importer of exotic rice, and we will, in fact, under relationships or collegial relationships with any of you, try to bring in varieties that you may need, and I'll explain what that process entails. But these are probably the sites about varieties and about some information about them, but it's very limited, and I'll tell you what it is that's there and what I think we can do to inform each other about information that you may have or want to share, because most of what you need isn't available in any database anywhere in the world yet. I also want to mention the Ricepedia, if you haven't seen it. The Sustainable Rice Platform, which, by the way, is actually an advocacy group. It's not a how-to. It's an advocacy group trying to help change policy. Very, very, very important, and happening at every scale across the globe, from the highest input investors down to the smallest farm, for all kinds of reasons. And then the US experiment stations and extension services, although those are mostly in the United States, will provide you with information for large-scale agriculture. Okay, I'm going to show you how to find information on GRIN. GRIN is not a very friendly site. It sounds friendly, got a grin on your face, but it's not really very friendly. So if you go into this site, which is ARS, Agricultural Research Service-grin.gov, you'll come into a page, it says search, and I would go into the search or just go into the search GRIN HTML. This will be posted on the website, this very slideshow. So I have put the URLs on. You don't have to write them down. If you have internet, you can always go back and find this, all right? But the point is, you come into something like this and you sort of peer at it. The pictures are really pretty, but you know, what do you really want to know? And I think most of what you want to know is here. It says, I don't know if you can read it, research crops and descriptor extension data queries. A lot of words. You click on that and it looks ugly. But those are the names of many of the plant species for which there is information in our national information resource system in the United States. So this is the best that the government has to offer you. But what the government has to offer you is the seeds, which you really want. So if you can get through this, you may be able to get to the seeds you want. So I'm going to walk you through it. If you look, you'll find rice. And it's not Ariza, it's rice. So fortunately, at least they're speaking, you know, the normal use of the term. You click on any one of these species should you be interested in anything else, and what comes up are the traits or the descriptors for which there is information. And this is basically it. So any other information is simply not available on the government site, but there is information about the biochemical nature of the seed, and most of these have to do with the seed quality, and I'll unpack this in a minute. The chemistry of seed has to do with the stickiness and how it cooks and all of the things that have to do with whether it's sake rice or long grain or short. Disease, resistance, characteristics, growth, parameters, including plant, in their case, plant height, morphology, so what it looks like, phenology, which is days to heading, and that's really important for all of you, is days to heading. And then some production, meaning how it mills. So what it looks like after milling and how well it mills. and then an interesting and important trait called retuning. Now, for you in the Northeast, you don't care about retuning because your season is so short. But in the southern U.S., and probably Glenn has a lot of experience with this, the United States is an area which we call subtropical zone. We're not tropical. We can't get 2 seasons a year. But we can get a season and a half if we take a first cutting in September and let it regrow on the stubble, because like any grass, it's still perennial. And in the US, we typically take a second cutting, sort of like you do with hay, on the regrowth after about a month or 6 weeks of regrowth, depending on where you are in the southern US. So retuning ability is that we breeders, we breed for the ability to regrow quickly after cutting to give you a second crop in the southern US. So retuning ability is interesting, fascinating for most people because they don't realize that we grow rice as a perennial and we take 2 cuttings in the southern US. And third, because as a northeastern grower, you absolutely do not want to breed for retuning because you want all the energy to go into the grain and it can die after that. If it retunes, it withholds energy, and Diane will talk a bit about this. It holds energy back in its stem in order to have that regrow. It doesn't deposit it all quickly. So there's an evolutionary strategy, and you don't want it. Okay, enough. If you click on the descriptor, you will get a definition. So most of these, as you see, you could not interpret. If you read this is what we have a problem with in the way governments present things. We can't interpret that at all. But if you click on it, then you'll find something. And I'm going to go under chemical so that you see how the descriptors. So this is what you get when you click on that and ask, what does that mean? Alkali spreading value, and many of you won't even be able to interpret that, but it has to do with rice quality. The amylose, whether it's aromatic, the gelatinization temperature, etc. Protein, and disease. And what I think is critical here is that even if you click on that, you're not going to get any more information. So if you need more, you'll have to go into Google and find out what it means. But this is as good as it gets from that perspective. Now, if you know you want aromatic rice, it's a yes-no. It's a categorical trait. But if what you want is a certain percent amylose, which determines the stickiness of the grain after it's cooked, then you need to know something about the percent amylose that you're looking for. And many of you may know that already. But in the United States, this is one of the key characteristics of the grain. And if you want to understand, let's say you want to go into Grin, and there are thousands of rice varieties, and you know you're looking for ones with a particular type of amylose. And if you're doing sake, you want a particularly low amylose. So if you went into amylose, you could say equal to, or you could click down less than or more than, and give a percent amylose, and it will search for you only the varieties that have the amylose you're looking for. So the beauty of this system, if once you can interpret it, is you can home in on just what you're looking for out of those thousands. You don't have to scroll through and look for them. But if you don't know what you're looking for, then you might just be looking at what's there. So here's an example of what's there. This is coming out of the Rice Quality Lab in Beaumont, Texas. And what they're telling you is that they evaluated all these traits, which are under biochemical traits. And this is how many accessions have been analyzed, rice accessions. So they have information on 6,000 or 7,000 accessions for grain quality. Almost the entire collection has been evaluated for grain quality because it's the critical thing that everybody really needs to know about the rice they grow. And you can go in for almost anything, grain size, grain shape, amylose, etc., and you can find out what the entire grain collection has, or at least the 7,000 that they're offering you in terms of grain quality. And what it would look like if you click on, let's say, amylose, which is what I clicked on, and I clicked on accessions, what it opens up is, this is the accession number. If you wanted to order it from Grin, you would order it by this number. This is the number of accessions that have this name and which are available as seed. So if it says 0, that means they don't have any seed available, but they still may know what the amylose is. Oh, sorry, my mistake. The 0 is the amylose score. Now, for those of you who don't know, 0 amylose would mean it's a sticky rice. We call it glutinous rice. And most of you aren't looking for glutinous rice, but it's near what you need for sake. you probably need the 1 to 2%. Most of you don't grow really low amylose rice. The average is, I'm just showing you a range here. This is the complete range of what's available. I cut out the middle section just to show you this. 29% amylose is really, really dry, a really hard grain, really dry, very light. What most of you probably want is somewhere in the 16 to 23% amylose, depending on whether you want the drier grain or the wetter grain. And the lower the amylose, the more sticky it cooks up. So specialty rices come in all kinds of amylose content, and you can try. And as I say, I cut out, the vast majority are between 12 and 23. So these are the extremes. You can click on them, you could order them. Will most of them grow in your area? No. Most of them will not flower in the Northeast. Most of these are tropical rices. So you do have to then look over at flowering time or something else. So that means you're going to be scanning through a whole lot of data to find out what the flowering time is, because you can't go from the fact that they've screened 6,000 rices for amylose and find out which ones they've done for flowering time. It's not that easy. It's a government site, right? So here's the amylose showing you know, what the distribution is. Between 9 to 12% amylose, they have 92 accessions. Between 12 and 16, they have 900 accessions, and on up, many thousands of them. And in this very high amylose, which would be almost like eating chalk, you know, there are 2. But those are mutants. Those are things nobody would want to grow. Aromatic. This is interesting for many of us. Many people want aromatic rice. The number of aromatics, it's a yes-no code. That's what this means. And they only have 130 out of those 7,000 that are aromatic in the United States. If you go to Erie's database, they have hundreds and hundreds of aromatic varieties. So the US just simply hasn't specialized in importing aromatic rices. I just go down here just to show you that sometimes it's yes, no, and it's really easy. Sometimes what should be easy, like awns, does it have the whisker or not? Oh no, it's not easy. It has a 0 to 9 scale for awns. You can have no awns, you can have short and partially awned, you can have short and fully awned, you can have long and partially awned, and you can have long and fully awned. So you would think that awns would be yes or no? No, awns is a 0 to 9. But once you know that, you can see what the distribution is, and if you're interested to know, for instance, something for that's very pretty to grow in an urban garden, you might want awns, you might want purple awns, you might want pink awns, you might want white awns, okay? So you sort of have to go through and sort of struggle through this site, but there's a lot there, and the seeds are connected to this information. Okay. Days to flowering is critical. You guys need something in the, certainly in the first, probably up to 86, up to 90 days, not more. I don't know if any of you have, how late is your flowering that you're still getting seed here? Ogie, how late is the latest flowering that you still get seed?
Around right now.
Which is how many days?
From transplanting?
Yeah.
2 months and 1 week.
Yeah. So something in this category. These will be the early rices, and usually they'll be the ones that are also cold tolerant. Earliness and cold tolerance typically go together. If you click on kernel length, you get these, this has to do with kernel length, and I just wanted to show you what's really interesting is that we have, I'll go back a minute, we have kernel length from 3 millimeters, tiny little round pearl grains, all the way up to 12 millimeters, which is a fantastic thing because there's much more variation for kernel length in domesticated rice than there was in the wild. Humans have selected on a range of kernel types because it also cooks up differently. So if you want to look, this is the mid-scale. These are all just the 8s. But you can find which varieties have really small grains and really large grains. And those kinds of things may be interesting to you if you're interested in trying to brand your rice, right? You want something that looks different. People can actually see that. And that's the kind of thing we can help breed with you for because you can select on it. Okay. Pericarp color is one of the traits that Sandy will be talking about later. We're actually involved in a participatory breeding scheme with Ogie and Linda here. And I just want to show you that there is a really interesting range of brand color types. And this is the number of accessions that are available. We've chosen an accession that we're breeding with, but this is the color chart that they give you so that you can understand what they're talking about. They don't always have visuals. White, light brown. This, by the way, is all brown rice. It's not polished, but white, light brown, speckled brown, brown, red, variable purple, and purple. And we're breeding a purple sticky rice with Ogi. So I do think that things that are visual are very compelling to the public. And part of most of us here, we're interested on the producer side of something that'll grow and flower. We're also really interested in our consumer market, because if we don't have a consumer market that brands us, then we look like any other rice on the market. So I happen to believe that we should be thinking a lot about these highly visible traits of the rice in the market. And you know, this is the kind of thing that many of these things can actually be done in a genetically simple way. Turns out never to be as simple as you think, right, Sandy? So she may talk a little bit about that. And then there's literature on the National Plant Germplasm System, NPGS site, which of interest to you may be these things. This is where to go to look for information, for instance, about variety release. Every variety released in the United States is released with a crop science registration publication. Registration of Gulfmart, registration of Lamont, registration of Nurex, registration, okay? Every US variety release comes with a registration. So it's published usually in Plant Science. It's also available with a click on the website. And I just thought I'd show you that in terms of information, you also see our group, because we've done quite a lot of work on our panels. And so we also come up as providing information about rice that's present in the National Germplasm System. And some of the kinds of things that we've been providing information for are rices that are the most widely requested because there's more information about them. And so what we see is the more information there is, the more people use the rice. So that's why we also want information back from you, because it's much easier once we assemble information to figure out which ones we should put our dedicated effort in terms of seed production. I'm going to switch over to Erie's information sites. I think these sites are very, very valuable, and they require a bit of study. They're the kind of thing you should probably think about accumulating and doing in the winter. They're not so easy to just quickly, how can I do it? It's not like I'm in the moment of which disease do I have, maybe, but how should I prepare a patty takes a little bit more preparation. So what I like about this is that they start out with obtaining rice. This is the knowledge bank. How to obtain rice from Erie. And I'll talk just briefly about that, and then we'll go on to some other things. What they tell you is that Erie provides small quantities of rice free of charge on demand to any individual or organization anywhere in the world for the purposes of research, breeding, or training. If you're commercial, you start to get into a little bit of issue with them, and I'll tell you why. So what you normally do is you get me to import the rice from Erie as a research system, and then I provide it to you. And there are a number of reasons why that tends to happen. It says we share the rice seeds stored in our International Rice Gene Bank according to the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. I'm going to just talk briefly about that. That's the main stumbling block for many of you in dealing with Erie right now. But this is their seed prep room. You've probably seen pictures of their actual seed bank, but their seed prep room looks more like what a community seed bank would look like. So if we decide as a community that we need to start producing seeds, we're going to need to have a space that's dry and cool so that even after our seeds are dried down, but before they're packaged, barcoded, and put into their foil oxygen-free envelopes, we have to have places to store them. You can store them in these hanging bags as long as there's good airflow and they're really dry. This is not a hugely expensive thing to do, but it has to be cool and maintained quite at dry temperatures. So I think we should just collectively understand it does take a little bit of resource to do it. Obtaining rice from Erie involves the Standard Material Transfer Agreement, or it's called the SMTA. You have to sign off on this agreement if you're going to request seeds from Erie, and the agreement requires that you practically have a lawyer to read it. So it has turned out to be a stumbling block now for the entire CG system in providing seed. Step 2 is choosing the right type of rice, because you're going to go through a lot to get it into this country. So let's make sure it's what you want before you start ordering it. It's not cheap or easy to order seed anymore. It's a difficult thing to do. So you go through and you find out what you want. Now, Erie's system for finding out what you want is going to not have too much information that's relevant to rice in the northeastern US. But maybe the location where it's grown, the location where it's from. We know if it comes from Hokkaido or the northern part of China, it's turning out to be a pretty good predictor. You also can look at what is called the International Network for Genetic Evaluation, or INGER, because this is the international system that circulates seed all over the world and trials it in 40 or 50 different regions of the world and provides information about its performance back to Erie. So you can find out how well something's done in many parts of the world, but it's mostly tropical. Step 3, you submit your request. You send your request in writing. And by the way, you have to tell roughly what you're going to use it for, who you are, and you have to show that you have the permit to import it into the United States. Most of you will not want to maintain permits with the federal government. I do maintain permits with the federal government. Sandy spends half her time maintaining permits for the feds, the state, the university, the biosafety, it goes on and on. So for all of you, once we can bring some seed in and provide it to you, I want you to understand it's not cheap, easy, or free, so let's be careful about what we ask when we try importing seed. INGER, the International Network for Genetic Evaluation of Rice, has their own website, inger.erie.org, and it's got lots of information over the last 40, 50 years about rice, the same varieties grown all over the world. But as I say, it's mostly tropical. What I like about INGER, it's a good example of how a smaller network is working here. So we take 5 varieties. We've asked all of you to try to grow those 5 varieties and send us back information on whether they flower in your environment. If we could get that information with growing degree days, we could start to make predictions about other varieties that would probably grow in your area. We are a very, 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 very small group of people compared to INGER, but the idea is the same, that collectively you get more back and you share more if you are willing to do a few things communally. The knowledge bank itself, the Rice Knowledge Bank, knowledgebank.erie.org, has lots of very important information that I think looking at it may be useful to you, and some of you already know this. So pre-planting, growth, and post-harvest. They have frequently asked questions. You can go into the rice doctor, the crop manager, quality assessment, et cetera, et cetera. I think Erie's super bag, which is a very useful thing to know about, a very, very important way of storing rice so that it will keep for a long period of time at very low cost. Popular items that people want to know about, and many of you who have interest in machines and small machinery. As I said, the average plot size in Asia is less than a hectare, less than a half hectare. That's the place to go to find out about machinery. The problem is getting that machinery into the US. That's not so easy. Okay, Rice Doctor, and just briefly, the Rice Doctor has lots of information, some of which may be useful to you. So Jim, when you used to email us and say, what the hell is this? If I didn't send it to Anna, I used to try to check out here because I have no idea how to predict what's going to afflict the rice here. Nobody has done it before. But what we see is that on the Rice Doctor, they give you images, and they will talk to you about armyworms, for instance, which can be a problem. Bacterial leaf streak, blast, bacterial blight, Rhizoctonia sheath blight, which is a big one in the United States. Snails. Good, bad, or indifferent, right? Some snails are really problematic. Some snails are just fine. Birds is a huge one. And many of you have already encountered that problem. How do you deal with birds? Well, you deal with them by breeding for awns. If you put the awn back on the seed, the birds don't like it anywhere near as well. But not everybody wants, if you're going to do machine threshing, you don't want the awn. So you got to deal with birds in other ways. Anyway, a variety of pests and diseases. There are fact sheets that you can download and you can print if you want to just keep them for reading later. On land preparation, nutrient management, management of other crop problems, planting, pest management, etc. Many of these fact sheets are fabulous, fabulous as starting points for all of us. They have videos. Now, if you go into this video, you're going to think you're in kindergarten. But if you listen up, you're going to learn something. So the presentation may not be attractive to you at first. And it has a very Asian flavor to it. But I think there's information there. They've done a good job to try to make it palatable. So if you have broadband, you can actually you can download and listen. And some of these are seminars. For instance, Roland Baresh is one of the world's most knowledgeable people about rice nutrient management. And here is one of his lectures. So you can hear really good information. You can listen to it. You can disagree with it. But it's a very nice source of opportunity for you. I actually think some of you are involved in preparing patties, and this might be very helpful for you. They have step-by-step. This is in an Asian context where everybody knows what a rice patty is. So it may not actually address some of your concerns, especially if you're on very sloping hillsides, et cetera, where you have to terrace first. But a lot of it talks about the rationale behind patty farming. So why do you puddle the soil? Why do you have to work the soil so much? Well, because the nutrient availability is all about how well you manage that soil. And the soil in a patty is managed very differently than an aerobic soil that most temperate farmers are used to. And if you zoom in on something like, okay, this one, step 5, which looks absurd, perform secondary tillage. They'll explain why they don't just till once. They till once, they let it sit for 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, and they till again. Why? It's very important, actually, if you're trying to equilibrate your soil. So they talk a lot about their rationale, and it's very disciplined. And, you know, it leads to a certain type of predictable result if you're interested in willing. You see the size of the rototillers. These are floating rototillers that you can use in a puddled soil. They have pontoons. And we use that kind of tiller in Asia. We also see larger machines coming in, but this is the size that I think might be attractive to many of you. They have a post-production section. This is a really important thing. We haven't covered it that much because I'm more on the genetics side. But, you know, did you know that in many developing countries, between 25 and 50% of the total value of rice grain is lost after harvest? So if you're not managing your post-harvest, you're going to lose quality. And many of you may have noticed already that if you're not storing your rice very well, rancidity creeps in. There's lots of issues about broken-ins and pests. So I think post-production is a very important section, and you might as well just try to read up on it. There's lots of sections in this. I just highlighted those two. So you can download the rice production manual if you want as a PDF. They talk about things like matching equipment to farm size. They talk about a variety of opportunities and where the blueprints, if not the machine, the blueprints for the machines are available. Erie used to maintain an engineering section, and they made all the blueprints available so that every village in Asia could produce their own machines and manufacture them using spare parts from old motorcycles and things that were in their villages. I think you'll find this website really useful if you go at it with an eye to the innovative nature of what you need and pick and choose. This is the Sustainable Rice Platform. As I said, it's mostly an advocacy group at this point, but I wanted to raise just to let you know that all the way through, this is coming down from, it's a sort of an NGO platform. This is the Sustainable Rice Platform that I think everybody needs to at least be aware of so that we can be supportive. This is what it's going to take to move from the UN and FAO all the way down through our countries and our localities to think of the future in a more sustainable way. We can't just do it locally. We have to do it at all levels. So I just thought it would be useful for you to know that it was happening. Now let's look just briefly at some of the grain quality issues. And this, I just wanted to say, they have something called a rice quality assessment kit that I'm not going to read all this, but the point is that with a few simple tools, and these are, each thing comes, you can get the assessment kit if you want, or you can just look carefully at those tools and probably find them here. One of them is a magnifying glass, for instance. The Rice Quality Assessment Kit is designed to provide you with the ability to evaluate things that are critical to commercializing your rice. all about how you get a sample weight, grain moisture content, grain temperature, that's important, and that's going to have to do with how you store it. A bunch of things related to visual checks, cracking, milling degree, and then the calculated parameters that come out, which anybody needs to be able to report as a statistic if they're actually producing something of commercial value. So how do you quantify purity? How do you quantify head rice recovery, for instance? So it's all there for you, and it tells you how to do it and how to calculate it. Now I'm going to move over and show you a few other resources. It's at the far end of the other extreme. How many of you are familiar with RiceTech? Okay. RiceTech is the only company in the United States currently that actually sells hybrid rice. So this is where all of the hybrid rice is coming from that's planted in the US. And the US is currently commercially for exporting almost 60% of the rice that it exports is now hybrid. Hybrids are extremely high yielding. They come in on the mark in terms of their mean amylose and all the grain quality parameters, but the variance associated with the performance of a hybrid is high. They're very resilient in the face of climate change. Many people believe that hybrids are the way of the future for a lot of reasons, but they're not as pure as an inbred line, and the quality is more variable. So what's happening is that the US rice, which used to be considered very high quality because it was inbred, is now very variable. In some years it's really good, in some years it's really bad, even though the mean performance is good. And that has to do with the way in which we evaluate and think about it. But this company has a website. They are growing faster in terms of getting their varieties out than any other source of rice varieties right now in the United States. So I thought you might want to take a look. When you go into their homepage, they're advertising their Clearfield varieties. XL, everything with XL is a hybrid in this country. And when it says Clearfield, it's a certain type of non-GMO weed resistant. It's a mutation, a natural mutation that they've bred in. It's a patented genetic trait, and it provides herbicide tolerance, but it's not GM. It's not Roundup. You have to use the Clearfield form of herbicide. So if you want a non-GM but patented form of weed tolerance, if you will, because it's herbicide resistance, that's what the Clearfield does for you. So that the grower can go in, they're going to expect very high yields, very big machinery, very large plantation size agriculture. But the important thing is when it says Clearfield, that means you're going to use Clearfield herbicide. So it's a chemically driven production system. But the information on the website is the kind of information that we need to provide for each other. So I'm going to say, try to look beyond all of the things I've just told you for a minute. Look through them and look and see the information that is useful. A 31 bushel, 1,400 pound advantage over the best or the previous inbred line. Excellent ratoon potential. Best straight head tolerance. Straight head is tolerant for arsenic in the soils. More consistent performance on clay soils. And it tells you when you should harvest it. You should harvest it between 18 and 20% moisture at first dry down to help maximize grain quality and grain retention. So they're very cued to the grower. The information on their site is very cued to the grower. It tells you all kinds of information that you would need if you were going to grow those varieties. They provide, these are the non-Clearfield, these are the non-herbicide tolerant hybrids. And what they say is, for instance, it's a later maturing traditional hybrid, that means it doesn't have the Clearfield in it, that pairs well with other hybrids by allowing growers to plant timely and maximize harvest efficiency. So you can double plant, you can get one out of the field, and this will mature a little later, you can move through. So even our most high-tech hybrid industry is looking at A, diversity in the field, and B, obviously they're cued to growers. So there's lots of interesting stuff on the website, and I think what we're trying to glean from it is what kind of information do you want? Well, if you take a look at this and you say, you know, I'd like to know that about the varieties we're planting, that could be useful for us. There are sites in Japan. Ariza Base is a site we use quite a lot. It's got lots of cool information about phenotypes that are either unusual or these are all non-GM phenotypes, and we've used some of this to breed into our varieties. So some of the purple, some of the sticky, some of the aroma, some of these unusual traits we get through this site. They're Japanese varieties and they tend to be good for your area, so they're temperate rice. So we can use them as breeding donors of a trait if that's something we want to introduce. It's not a site for growers. It's a site for geneticists. Anybody heard of the Ricepedia? No. Just a very interesting site. Ricepedia is basically all cool information about rice. So if you're going to prepare a presentation, I thought of you guys, you know, in Martha's Vineyard, in education. Go there and check it out for all this really interesting cultural information and where it's grown and how. And I just, you know, I just recommend it. It's a wonderful site. And our experiment stations have massive numbers of recommendations, but I've checked through them all. I don't find any that are particularly relevant to the United States organic growing community or the small scale producer. They're mostly for high input agriculture, but they may actually have things of interest to you if you sort through. And then I'm just back, and I'm ending here, back to our rice diversity site. Help us make it better. If there's something that we could do, and we are already getting information from this conference, any comments that you make, we try to register them, and then we'll prioritize them within the resource boundaries that we have and see if we can provide back better information in the future. And as I say, the place that right now you'd find information that's relevant to you, you'd have to go in under education and outreach at the moment and look for the Northeast rice growers, and that's where we would be posting it. It's a little bit buried, but that's because we envision a change in the source of funding, and we didn't want it to necessarily be linked always to the NSF. Okay? So if we get funding in the future, we'll be off and running, and we may, in fact, be able to be more responsive than we have been in the past. So thank you very much.